My trip to the slaughter yard, a story my mom wouldn't tell me until my 30s. So let me start out by saying I enjoy writing, so this will be long. It is nonfiction though, but will hopefully be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls slept until Judgment Day or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman who always talks way too loud was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor, alias. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean house. Mean house, ugly house, don't like. Scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to the stress of the move. Now this house was ramshackle AF and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house and, until recently before we moved in, still had a working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young, broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100% LOL. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our Pit/Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going ape-ish #T from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there and drug me out of the water himself. Thank you, pupper, love you. Although my mom was confused how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim, she figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss starts going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping, every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around and bark at my mother, wait for her to catch up a little before racing off again. That he ended up leading her almost a mile and a half, out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in, at least, one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me and, after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here and shotting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there is no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis but haven't yet decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery because whatever TF those things were, I really don't think they were children. The cabin by the lake. Josh stood over his father's coffin, looking down at his inanimate parent. It's strange seeing him so still and quiet, he would think to himself. Josh's father seemed like such a joyful and loving man, which is why it hit the family so hard when he suddenly killed himself. "I'm sorry for your loss," a strange man said to Josh. This man was a tall, well-built man with dark bronze skin and short dark hair. "Thanks," Josh responded. Josh didn't know this man, but he shook his hand once he offered it to him. As he did, he noticed a strange hieroglyphic-like tattoo on his wrist peek its way from out of the man's suit. "How did you know my father?" Josh inquired. "My name is Russell. I used to work with your dad," he answered, smiling through his short, well-groomed beard. "Dad never mentioned you, Russell?" Josh released his grip from Russell's handshake. "It was a long time ago. Before you were born, actually," Russell said. Now that Josh thought about it, he actually didn't know what his dad did for a living, he only knew that he worked in an office. "Is your mother all right?" "I haven't seen Beth in ages," Russell asked. "Who the fuck is this guy?" Josh thought to himself. "My mom, she died actually giving birth to me," Josh said as his eyes looked away for a second. "Damn kid. I'm so sorry. I didn't know," Russell said. "What are you going to do now?" he continued. Josh looked across the room. He noticed something a bit unnerving. There were a lot of people there he didn't recognize. "I'm not sure." Josh turned and responded to Russell. "Well, just take care of yourself, Josh. If you need anything, just give me a call," Russell said as he handed over his business card. Josh took it from his hand and read it. Russell Wallace, Realtor. The house felt so empty without his father there. It had been 3 years since Josh moved away to go to college, but he decided to take some time off since he heard the news. "It's weird being home again, huh, Callie?" Josh asked as he pet his dog. She was a German Shepherd breed with a beautiful black coat with small spots of brown near her eyes. Josh was at his dad's house to take care of some affairs before he returned to school. From across the house, Josh could hear the phone ring. He still couldn't believe his dad kept a landline in this day and age. He walked across the house to the living room to pick to the cordless phone. "Hello?" he asked. "Oh, hi, Aunt Sue. Yeah, I'm at the house now. No, I have my cell on me. Weird, I have no missed calls." Suddenly, Josh heard a crash behind him. He looked and saw what looked like a box that had fallen off of the bookshelf. Perhaps Callie accidentally knocked it over, he thought. "Hold on, Aunt Sue," he said as he put the cordless down as he began picking up the contents and putting them back in the box. Of all the items that fell out, one stood out to him, a picture of a cabin. In front of the cabin stood 3 people. They were young, but he recognized all 3 of them. His mother, his father, and Russell Wallace, the man he had met at his father's funeral. Josh picked up the picture and walked back to the phone. "Hey Aunt Sue, did my dad own a cabin?" he asked. I think so, but he hadn't been there for years," Sue said over the phone. "Where is it at?" Josh inquired. "It's located in some woods outside of this old abandoned town called Sleepy Falls in Maryland," she answered. Josh pulled out his phone and tried looking up the town. "I can't find anything on it except some ghost story sites," he said after his search yielded little to no results. "You're not going to find much on it. It's one of those weird old towns that just kind of disappeared off the map and was forgotten about. Only so many people know about it. Most people who go there now are ghost hunters looking for cryptids or something," she explained. Josh looked at the photo again and asked, "How did Mom and Dad know about it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Aunt Sue?" Josh asked. "Josh, your mom and me, we're from there," she finally answered. "At the time there were less than 50 people still in that town. When your dad and his friend came there for real estate development, that's when he met your mom." "He never told you any of this?" Josh stood there dumbfounded. He never knew any of this. "Josh, if you want to check it out, I can watch your dad's house for a few days while you decide what to do with the cabin," Aunt Sue said. Josh agreed, and Aunt Sue sent Josh the location for the cabin so he could map his route. Aunt Sue arrived at the house early in the morning. She looked just like his mother did in pictures. "How are you doing, young man?" She giggled as she removed her sunglasses and ran her fingers through her long curly red hair. "Young man?" Josh scoffed. Aunt Sue was only 15 years older than Josh. She was kid herself when his parents had met. She gave him a hug and helped him load his bag into the car. Callie jumped into the front seat of the car as Josh closed the trunk. "You're taking your dog with you?" she asked. Josh looked at Callie, who tilted her head as she looked back at him. "Callie goes everywhere with me," he responded. "Oh, I see," she responded. "Well, be safe and hope you get there safely," she said as she gave Josh another hug and began to walk towards the house. The drive was nearly 7 hours. On his way he had called Russell and asked him to meet him at the cabin, though Russell said he wouldn't be able to make it there until tomorrow night. As Josh got closer to his destination, he noticed his GPS lose signal a few times before it finally did him back on track. The GPS took him to an old forest road, completely bypassing the town. Callie seemed frantic about the area they were in. She whined and jumped off the seat and ducked down into the floorboard. "What's wrong, Callie?" Josh asked as he reached down to pet her, but she just ducked down lower. Josh just shrugged and drove forward towards his destination. As he approached the cabin, he saw that it was a bit dilapidated. "We're definitely gonna have to do a lot of work here," he said, looking down at Callie, who still hadn't come back from the floorboard. The cabin was fairly well built, but there was overgrown brush everywhere. As Josh opened the cabin door, he could feel the weight of the door and the old hinges. The place was dusty and dirty, but surprisingly well furnished. There was a fireplace against the wall that hadn't seen fire in a long time. Above it was a double-barreled shotgun that looked like an antique but well kept. "I doubt that thing even works," Josh thought to himself. Suddenly he heard Callie's paws scratch against his car as she jumped out the window and ran past Josh into the cabin. "What's gotten into you, Callie?" he asked. Josh didn't like this. Callie was normally not this skittish. She was a rescue from an abused home, and when Josh first got her, she would act a lot like this. But she eventually got much better as she learned to trust Josh. "Maybe we should just go home, girl," Josh said as he knelt down to pet her. Josh himself had an eerie feeling about the place. Maybe it was the atmosphere, or maybe it was just the stories about the town, but something didn't feel right. Josh was about to grab Callie and head back home until his phone rang. "Hello?" Josh answered. "Josh? It's Russell Wallace. Some stuff got moved around and I think I can get there tonight. Do you mind waiting for me?" Josh paused for a moment. "Yeah, I can wait for you. What time do you think you'll get here?" he asked. "Should be just before sundown. I know the place. I haven't been there in years, but we'll do a walkthrough and we'll list it next week," Russell explained. "Thanks. See you soon," Josh said as he turned off his phone. Josh grabbed the cleaning supplies from his trunk and started getting to work. He started inside, rearranging furniture and sweeping the floors. He eventually made his way into the one bedroom. The bed frame and mattress old and dusty, but still surprisingly in good shape. He dragged the mattress outside to dust it off. "Not bad, not bad," Josh said as he looked at the cabin, looking in a lot better shape. "But we're not quite done yet," he said as stepped outside and saw the overgrowth of plants and bushes attempting to reclaim the cabin within nature. the sun still shining through the trees, but Josh knew he still had some time before Russell would show up. Josh continued to clean up around the cabin, but before he knew it, the sun was getting lower behind the forest. Where the hell is Russell? Josh thought to himself. Come on, Callie, we're getting out of here, Josh said, rounding up all his stuff. They packed up their things, got into the car and turned the key over. Nothing. The car wouldn't start. Damn it, Josh said as he slammed his palms into the steering wheel. He looked down at Callie, who just whimpered. Sorry, Callie, it looks like we're stuck here until Russell gets here. Josh rolled out his sleeping bag onto the bed and Callie laid by his feet. Josh looked at his phone, no missed calls or messages from Russell. Josh tried calling him, but no answer, no voicemail box set up. Josh just sighed as he pulled a power bank from his backpack and plugged his phone in to charge it. Josh woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of Callie barking at the front door of the cabin. Josh looked out the small window on the door to see if it was Russell arriving this late, but nothing was out there. He opened the door to see if perhaps she needed to go outside to relieve herself, but when he opened the door, she just looked at the tree line and growled. Josh looked off to the trees where Callie was looking but saw nothing there. Suddenly, Josh heard what sounded like a knock on one of the trees. Russell? Is that you out there? Josh demanded. Nothing sounded back as Josh stood there in the doorway. Another knock sounded, followed by another and another. More of them sounded throughout the forest as they approached closer to the cabin. Josh wanted to see what was making these noises, but everything in his being was telling him to get inside. He slammed the door and pushed a dresser against the door. Callie ran back into the room and hid under the bed as Josh backed into the room himself. As he did, he saw the shotgun on the wall above the fireplace. He was about to run and grab it until all the knocks were now on the cabin walls and door. He backed into the room and hid in his sleeping bag, hoping they would just go away. By the time the knocking had stopped, it was morning and Josh got out of his sleeping bag. He was exhausted since he hardly slept the night before. Callie was out from under the bed, scratching at the door of the bedroom. Don't worry, Callie, we're getting the fuck out of here, Josh said as he packed up his bag. He moved the dresser away from the door and stepped outside. What the fuck? Josh asked as he stepped outside. His car was gone, tire tracks leading off into the forest. He picked up his phone to dial Russell. The phone rang once but was picked up this time without an answer. Russell? If this is some sort of fucking joke, it's not fun. Josh dropped his phone as he turned back around to look at the cabin. Strewn across the cabin walls were parchment paper. Each paper had been nailed into the cabin walls. Each piece of paper had a single message written on it in red ink. She sees all. Come and see. At the bottom of the paper was a strange symbol, identical to the one that was tattooed to Russell's wrist. Upon closer inspection, Josh realized that this wasn't paper at all, it was some sort of animal skin. What kind of animal is this? Josh questioned as he touched the skin. He took a step back, startled once he realized that this was not just any animal, it was human skin. Josh was so shocked by this revelation that he had forgotten he was on the phone with Russell. When Josh picked up the phone, there was still no answer on the other end, just silence. Suddenly, a knocking sound came from the other end of the phone. Josh's blood ran cold as he quickly hung up. Suddenly, a strange whistle sound could be heard from within the forest. Callie immediately rushed out the door, barking wildly as she ran towards the sound. Callie, no! Josh screamed as he began to chase after her. She bolted through the forest as Josh was trying to catch up. Unfortunately, he lost track of her. Callie, please no! Josh wailed with deep sadness as he collapsed to his knees. He was truly alone now. As he looked around him, he saw that on many trees were the same paper message nailed into them. Josh lumbered his way back to the cabin, closed the door behind himself and fell to his knees. He took out his phone and called Aunt Sue. It rang and rang and rang but eventually went to voicemail. Aunt Sue? If you get this message, please come pick me up. I'm sorry I can't hear. I lost Callie. I'm scared. He hung up, dropped his phone on the ground. He laid down on the floor and closed his eyes. When Josh woke next, it was nighttime. He tried to grab for his phone but he couldn't find it. He made his way to the bedroom and pulled a flashlight from his bag along with some matches. He walked around the cabin lighting lanterns and candles throughout. One of the things he noticed was a pair of boot prints in the dirt next to where he was laying earlier. This sent a chill down his spine. Was someone watching me sleep? Josh asked himself. Before Josh could answer his own question, a terrifying scream could be heard coming from within the woods. It sounded both human yet not human at the same time, and all Josh could think of was he hoped that Callie made it out of the forest. He grabbed the shotgun off of the wall above the fireplace and checked the breech. 2 shells that looked surprisingly new were loaded into the shotgun. 2 shells. Only 2 shells, Josh kept thinking to himself as he waited in front of the closed door for whatever was in the woods. It seemed like forever, but only about 20 minutes had passed since he heard that inhuman scream. He could hear something rustling through the forest heading towards the cabin. He heard it rushing towards the door, breathing heavily. It pounded against the heavy door. Josh raised the shotgun to eye level and readied his shoulder for the recoil. The second slam against the door broke through and the creature entered the cabin. It was a naked man with a horse's head on his shoulders. Josh didn't have time to process what he was looking at. He knew this thing was here for him. He fired the first shell into the monster's gut and pushed him back into the dresser, knocking over a lantern, lighting the dresser and the floor. It landed into a blaze. The creature got back up to face Josh as the flames began to engulf more of the cabin. Josh knew where his last shell had to go. He took aim, pulled the trigger and shot the beast in the head. It dropped to the ground and was soon consumed by the roaring fire. The doorway out was blocked by growing flames. Josh just sat down and resigned himself to his fate. As he sat there waiting for the flames to take him, he noticed blood from the creature pool strong a strange squared area in the floor. It was a hidden trapdoor, maybe a way out. Josh quickly jumped up and found the hidden latch on the door and opened it. He dropped down as the door closed behind him. The fires above slightly illuminated the room underneath the cabin, but he pulled out his flashlight in order to get a better look of his surroundings. There was nothing down there except for a desk and a chair. On the desk was a book. Josh looked around more and saw a big heavy-looking steel door. He grabbed the book and with what strength he had left pulled the steel door open. Past the door was a long tunnel. Where it led, Josh had no idea. He closed the steel door behind him and headed deep into the unknown.